The toothy edge is something which many people are obsessed with, and yet it's something that almost nobody seems to describe properly or even manage to achieve. People think they know how to achieve it, and sometimes they do manage to create it, but usually they're entirely misunderstanding how it's actually being formed. This wouldn't really be an issue, but it leads people to try and create it in ways which are impossible. Sometimes they then seem to just lie about the edge properties they're experiencing, or give bad advice to others on how to achieve it themselves. This can lead to overall frustration and lacking performance, so it's important to understand what's actually happening, so that you can achieve this toothy edge yourself. I'll just give a quick overview on what a toothy edge actually is for those who aren't up to speed yet. So when we talk about a toothy edge, we're referring to the microscopic height variations along the length of the apex. These act like saw teeth or serrations, and they give mechanical advantage in a draw cut, and they can also help with edge retention. What I've termed the toothy edge fallacy is the way in which people describe how they create one. So the traditional and very logical thought is that the abrasive particles cut a channel down the bevel all the way to the apex and then leave a low spot, and in between where the abrasive particles cut, a high spot remains, which would be the tip of the serration. This seems very logical, but it's wrong. It just doesn't happen. The reason it's important to know that this is not true is because people will have you believe that you can use a coarse stropping compound to strop tooth back into a toothless apex. This is absolutely not true. I'm 1000% certain of it. Some people might believe they've experienced this, but I can assure you they're not stropping serrations into the apex, and we'll get onto why in a moment after I explain what the toothy property actually is. Now we'll look at how this toothy property is actually formed. So this is not new information. It's been known about in the community for a very long time, but the fallacy which I just spoke about is so prevalent and people talk about it with such conviction that it still persists. Let's jump over to the Science of Sharp website and look at some really useful SEM images. The best images Todd has on this topic are on the dual grit sharpening post. To quote Todd here, he says, "The first image shows the coarse side of the blade prior to stropping. The edge is non-linear with height variations in the order of 10 microns, and for the most part the height variation does not correlate to the scratches." What he says here is very important, and that is that the height variation, which are the microserrations, do not correlate with the scratches. This suggests that the height variation is caused by some other means. Just to quickly catch anyone that is going to complain that this phenomenon is caused by the dual grit sharpening method, Todd explicitly says on plenty of other posts that this is the norm. This is what happens when you sharpen regardless of the sharpening method. Flipping over to the fine side here, we can actually see that those are burr fragments which are causing the irregularity in height. These are classified as burr because they're outside what Todd refers to as the sharpening triangle, which he shows here. The important takeaway here is that the serrations are not lining up with the scratches. They're also outside of the sharpening triangle, so those serrations are actually burr fragments. If we jump to Todd's latest article, which is 7 Misconceptions About Knife Burrs, he has 4 classifications of burrs, but we're most interested in number 4 for the sake of building a toothy edge. Todd refers to class 4 as a thick 1 to 2 plus micron burr of undamaged and aligned metal which is strong enough to resist deformation when used as a cutting edge. In this article on misconceptions about burrs, Todd says, "I'm confident that many people are deliberately but unwittingly forming burrs with their sharpening process and they're happy with the results. Most so-called toothy edges formed by coarse stones are burrs. There is no question that these edges can perform better in certain tasks than a refined burr-free razor-type edge." With this new knowledge and SEM proof of what process is creating a toothy edge, we now know how to create one, and just as importantly, we know how not to create one. One of the ways you don't create one is by stropping. I did mention earlier that I would explain how I think sometimes you can actually recover tooth by stropping, so I'll explain that now. My theory is that this class 4 burr has rolled or deformed, and that you are realigning and abrading it back into shape. However, this does not require a 6 to 15 micron or a 20 micron compound to achieve. More abrasion means more burr removal, which means less tooth. So if anything, the plastic deformation which happens from the force of the substrate pushing the burr back to stand up is recovering the tooth. Using this information from Todd and my own personal testing, I'll explain the best way to achieve a toothy edge which I have discovered. Sharpen on a coarse electroplated diamond stone, 300 to 600 grit JIS. Minimize this burr as much as possible. Remember, the height variation on the apex in the SEM images was only 10 microns in height, so you don't want to leave a burr which you can see with the naked eye or even consumer grade optics. Finish up with very light passes and get the burr aligned and minimized as much as possible on the stone alone. This will leave you with a very, very toothy edge. If you want to strop to add some extra sharpness and remove or align any of the micro burr that's left, use the finest compound you have. Remember that you are not cutting teeth into the apex, so all refining from this point is going to remove those teeth. The slower and the finer the compound, the better. This will allow you to remove any negative out of align burr without abrading too much of the purpose-built toothy burr. 4, 6 and 9 micron or greater will really, really quickly remove any of that tooth, so just don't use it. Just before I finish up this video, I want to give my opinion on refined edges with minimal to no tooth. Frequently people think that these edges perform worse than they really do, or at least worse than they're really capable of. And that's usually because in the process of refining your edge, in reality you actually rounded over the apex, so it's not only burr-free, but now it's just dull. It's not dull because it's burr-free, it's dull because you rounded it over while polishing. A blade that can sever a hanging hair on contact is absolutely not dull, and you're not going to struggle to cut your tomatoes with it. Having said that, a more coarsely finished blade is going to be more suitable for most tasks which are not push cuts. Push cut tasks being like wood carving, spoke shaves, planes, stuff like that. Well, you know, all of those wood carving tasks. Thank you to anyone who managed to stay this long into the video. Hopefully you now realise that you don't strop tooth into an apex with a 20 micron compound. It's just nonsense. Anyone who tells you that is talking shit, so just don't listen to them. And if you want some good stropping compounds and strops, then go to my website or any of the retailers. I'll leave links in the description.